Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. In this story, Naruto is a one-man team. After graduating from the academy, Naruto starts to reveal his true self. Won't everyone be surprised at what the demon can do? Powerful Naruto X Harem. Be sure to check the description for the creator of the great fanfic, and don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to this channel. Now let's start the story. Chapter 23. While you were gone. Disclaimer: I think I'm closer to owning the company I work for than owning the rights to Naruto. I will be using currency as it was in the 1870s Japan when the currency was switched from ryo to yen. In other words, 1 ryo equals 1 yen. For exchange rate purposes, I'll be using the current exchange rate of 92 yen to $1 US. While not completely accurate, it should suffice to give somewhat manageable prices. This chapter is a collection of shorts of some of what was happening while Naruto was away. Enjoy. Harusada Tenten. The group flinched at the tone of the gruff voice, but none more than the girl belonging to the shouted name. Hi, father. Slightly afraid, the girl turned towards the man as he came striding up to the group. You disobeyed me last night, Tenten. I am very disappointed in you. Nawa. Harusada crossed his arms as he reached them and stood facing his daughter with obvious disapproval in his eyes. It was just a sleepover, Dad. You're always telling me I should make more friends. I meant decent friends. As soon as the words left his mouth, he realized the implications he had just made as the rest of the group took a step forward and crossed their arms. The glares he got would have been enough to put a raging bull into a fear-induced coma, but he stood firm. A ninja he may not be, but he'd be damned before a bunch of teenage girls got the better of him. I of course don't mean your current company, but rather Naruto-kun. Tenten finished for him flatly, obvious distaste for his attitude dripping from her voice. Exactly what is it that you have against him, Dad? Well, I've heard all kinds of stories about him and how he treats others. I'm just doing my job as your father and looking out for you, honey. He tried to soften his eyes to calm her down, but it was rather difficult with her glare pinning him in place. And just what stories did you hear, Mr. Harusada? Ino tapped her foot expectantly. How about how he slaughtered a bunch of civilians recently? Even the ninja that come to the shop are talking about it all the time. He puffed up his chest at the mention of his store. As a weaponsmith, he held great pride in his work. How about how those civilians were trespassing and trying to steal his property? How about how he left most of them alive and only killed those that broke some law the Sandame made that calls for death upon breaking it? How about how those civilians outside the property were calling for his death for rightfully defending his home? Haku shot back with such fury that the man was forced to take a step back in surprise. Well, they didn't mention that. What about how he keeps pranking all the stores in town and random people? What about how those were the people that wouldn't let him shop in their stores to begin with? What about how those are people that used to beat him? What about how that was his way of practicing his ninja skills since no one would spare their time to teach him? Hinata called out, surprising not only the smith, but her companions as well. What about? Just give it up, Dad. He's not some monster, and no matter how deep you dig you won't hit any dirt. Well, he's still a boy, and I know how boys think and act because, believe it or not, I was a young boy once too. The elder Harusada had to hide the hurt that came from the few disbelieving looks he got. Anyo, Harusada-san. Naruto wouldn't and has never done such a thing to any of us. Haku-chan, Kin-san and myself all live with him and he has done nothing but respect us. Hinata looked downcast a little at the memory of just how far from the truth the man was. Back when they had managed to put the blonde in the hospital due to their own aggressive pursuit of him. As the three others who were involved in the event caught on to her thoughts, they too looked down as they remembered the shame in their actions. Ino spoke up softly, just loud enough for those in the immediate vicinity to hear. Sir, Naruto-kun is not your typical adolescent male. Because of what he's been through in life, he doesn't act like a true teenager most of the time. Sure, he will kiss and flirt a little, but that's as far as it has ever gone with him, and all the farther he is willing to go for a long time. So he's just biding his time until he wants to strike. No. Haku and Kin said in unison. Haku continued. No, that has nothing to do with it. He's afraid to go farther, both for our sakes as well as his own. He doesn't want us to accidentally waste our lives for a small fling. Plus she couldn't finish as Kin slapped a hand over her mouth. Sorry, but his own reasons are his own. We aren't the ones to be giving away that history. Kin felt her friend nod in agreement under her hand before she released her, allowing her to apologize for nearly revealing too much. Tenten's father looked skeptical, but relented that his daughter had spent the night at the boy's house and seemed to be in perfect health. Not to mention she seemed to have gained quite a few female friends, something he had been bugging her to do for some time now. Fine, but you are only to be in that house if others are there too. I don't want you alone with him under any circumstances. Is that understood? Hi. Can I go now? Since Naruto went on his mission, we decided to have a girls' day out. Tenten replied with a wave of her hand and a smile. Nawa sighed at his daughter. He hated to admit it, but she was growing up. Being an official ninja now, he really had no legal sway over her, but that didn't mean he wouldn't fret over her well-being as her father. Go then, but make sure you're back for dinner. You are not sleeping under any roof but mine tonight, young lady. Sure thing, Dad. Tenten smiled and ushered the others away before the man could change his mind. He had to sigh again as the group disappeared down the street. I really hope I didn't just make a mistake there. Don't worry, Harusada-san. Naruto may be young, but he would as soon chop his own arm off as hurt anyone who doesn't deserve it. Spinning on his heel, the smith found himself face to face with a bright orange book. Only one person was bold enough to read such a thing in public. Kakashi-san, what do you know of that boy? I know that he'd do anything for his comrades. I know that he has a sense of honor greater than most samurai. I know that, if there is a chance he can save someone and turn them to his side, that he will find the way to do it. I also know that if I had a daughter, there would probably be no safer hands for her to be in short of a eunuch. Kakashi casually flipped a page in his book as he waited for the man's reply. I still don't want her alone with him. She's my baby girl and she's all I have left. I may be a little overprotective, but that's my right as a father. Fair enough, just remember to give him a fair chance. Despite what you heard about him, Naruto is probably the safest male of their generation to hang around. We shall see. Over the course of the first few days, it was rather pleasant for the girls at the Namikaze estate. For the most part, they simply hung out and trained unless they had missions to go on. Haku and Kin formed a temporary team. They were told that Kiba would join them as well once his injuries were healed, something they weren't really looking forward to, and that Hitaki Kakashi would be their Jonin sensei. Once Kin was filled in on the Inuzuka's past actions, she was more than ready to put a senbon to his baby makers if he ever tried anything with her. That was only the start of their problems, as they soon found out. Now that word had gotten out that Naruto was out of the village, they started getting more and more visitors. Some stated that they simply wanted to look around for old time's sake and they were just as politely turned away. Others, including Homura and Kaharu, were more demanding that they be granted entrance. When denied, they attempted to force their way in, but Naruto's locking seal held true and didn't budge. The girls were almost hoping that someone would be foolish enough to try to jump the wall, just so they would have something to take their frustrations out on. Unfortunately, after Naruto dealt with the last bunch that entered his property without permission, the rest were hesitant to follow suit. Thankfully, that all died down after other ninja began to show up around that section of town. Ninja that by all rights had no business in the area. Members of the Yamanaka, Nara, Akamichi, Aburame and even the Inuzuka clans had all been impressed enough with the group's performance during the Chunin exams that they took it upon themselves to look after Naruto's place and its inhabitants while he was away. They were joined by others who were grateful for the blonde's actions after word spread about how he had helped in the Sandaim's fight against Orochimaru, and those who just hated the civilian council. Where there are good deeds though, there are also foul plots abound. Hinata had been approached by numerous members of the Hyuga clan. Some had been friendly while others were extremely aggressive or even saddened. The thing that they all seemed to have in common though was that they wanted her to return to their clan. Those that had expected the once meek girl to be easily persuaded were rather surprised when she stood fast in her decision to stay clear of the noble clan, even after they promised her status back as clan heir if she accepted, or the worst beating in her life if she refused. Today though would be the worst encounter thus far. Not for what was said, but for who had decided to show themselves. Hinata was happily working in the garden at the front of the estate while Ino and Kin were working around the side of the house. The front was her favorite though, and she was currently working on training Ivy to grow over the front gate. At least that was her plan until she heard the shuffling of feet on the other side of the wall. Gen and Hinata. Hinata turned towards the gate of the estate with mixed feelings of hatred and dread. The voice she heard was known all too well to her. She narrowed her eyes at the sight of two members of her previous family as she walked a little closer to them. Hyuga Hiyashi. Hyuga Neji, how may I help you too? Not used to being addressed as such, especially by his weakest offspring, the distaste on the Hyuga head's face was palpable. Despite his anger, Hiyashi managed to calm himself enough to talk. Hyuga Hinata, you are required to attend a meeting at the Hyuga compound in 2 days' time. The elders and myself have decided to make you an offer that will allow you to continue with your current endeavors. I'm sorry, but I won't be able to make it to that meeting. It is regrettable. Hinata replied coolly. How unfortunate. We will reschedule for later in the week then, I suppose. Hinata could see the man's knuckles widening as his hands balled into fists. Well, this is most distressing. You see, my whole month is absolutely booked solid. Hinata gave a small smirk. He couldn't touch her as long as she was on her side of the wall. You seem to have grown some courage, brat. Though I wonder if you would have the same courage if you were here on the street, talking to us face to face. No matter. There are other ways to persuade you to come. This one you should be very familiar with. Hiyashi gave a slight wave to his side and Neji reluctantly undid his Hittite and the bandages covering his forehead. Hinata narrowed her eyes again at the sight of her cousin's Hyuga Soke no Juinjutsu. From the remembrance of past pain in his eyes, Hinata became worried for what her father might have in store for him, and for her. As much as it pains me to do this, Hinata, if you refuse to answer our summons, I will be forced to take drastic measures. While you may be able to remain safe behind the demon's walls, there are others who are not so fortunate. To punctuate his statement, Hiyashi activated Neji's seal, forcing pain into his system and sending him to the ground in agony. As quickly as the pain began, it was gone and Neji was left breathing heavily in the dirt. You see, Hinata, walls are amazing for protecting yourself, but when it comes to protecting others, let's just say, they get in the way. He smirked at his daughter, but to his own surprise she wasn't bawling for him to stop at all. He could tell she was upset, but he could also see that she wasn't about to budge either. Had he been paying attention to her instead of his own joys in using the seal to get to her, he may have noticed the small jerk in her movements. You're despicable, Hiyashi. Hurting your own family just so you can gain back complete control over our bloodline. I'm sorry, Neji, but you chose this path yourself when you decided to try to kill me at the preliminaries. That's right, father, I won't step in and save him just so you can try to win me over. Or were you going to wait until I came to your little party then force me to receive the same seal? Remember well that you have no control or say over me or my actions any longer. No matter who you threaten, or who you try to make an example of, I will not bend to your will anymore. To show that she was finished talking, Hinata strode away into the house while Hiyashi stood red-faced and glaring at her back. That insolent little harlot. I'll have her back under my thumb if it's the last thing I do. Hiyashi continued to rant until a new figure showed up at the gate, 2 figures in fact. So the almighty Hyuga-sama decides to pay us a little visit, does he? Can't say you're very pleasing to the eye. Or the ear for that matter. Not to mention how barbaric he is. How the mighty have fallen. What right do you have to speak to me as such, you little demon whores? You, Yamanaka, should be ashamed. Unlike my daughter, you are still a clan heir. To even be seen with such worthless trash is a disgrace to all of the clans. As for your little Odo spy friend, maybe I'll just have the council execute her for her involvement in the invasion. What involvement? She assisted us against the Oto and Suna forces. If you're going to execute her, then you better be planning on executing all of our allies. I believe you took part in the battles, so why don't you do us all a favor and start with yourself? Ino glared at the pupil-less eyes of the Hyuga head, not even flinching as he started to raise his killing intent. If you haven't gotten the memo yet, Inoichi confirmed that your precious Uchiha brat wasn't the one that fought against Gaara's Tanuki form and beat it. That feat was courtesy of Naruto, your so-called demon, so in the end it was the one you denounced so much that saved us from the real demon. If anything, that should make the clans approve of any relationships he has. Like Ino, Kintu faced off Hiyashi without backing down, though they were now beginning to sweat a little from the pressure behind it. Hiyashi just sneered at the 2 girls. Again, you little wenches seem to be tough when there is a barrier between us. I wonder how you would act without such an obstacle in the way. If you'd like we could meet you in the center of the market and humiliate you there. Of course you'd probably end up attacking us and because of that you would be putting yourself in prison. It doesn't matter if you're a council member or not, attacking a Konoha ninja, especially a clan heiress, would earn you a one-way trip. Isn't that right, Hyuga? Ino glared at him. Now I believe our little game here is finished. Goodbye Hiyashi. Like Hinata before them, the two girls turned their backs to the enraged clan head and entered the house. Not seeming to care when Hiyashi stomped off down the street while Neji struggled to get back to his feet and limp along behind him, glancing back only once. How's Hinata? Kin asked, slightly worried. She'll be fine, but I hope she doesn't hate me for taking her over for that little bit. I couldn't have her leaving with that man just because he was hurting her cousin. The two walked into the sitting area to see Hinata face down on the couch. It was obvious that she was sobbing due to the shaky raise and fall of her back and shoulders. Hinata, I'm sorry, but I had no choice. Hinata turned her tear-streaked face to her friends. Don't apologize. You did the right thing. I probably would have gone with him if you let me keep control. I would have crumbled and left and possibly died. I wouldn't want Naruto-kun or any of you to hurt because I have a weak will. No, don't apologize to me. I'm the one that should be thanking you, for allowing me to act how I wish I could act in front of him all these years. It made me happy, but I still didn't want to see Neji get hurt. I hope he's not punished because of this. Don't worry Hinata-chan. I'm sure he'll be fine. After all, he's the Hyuga prodigy. I doubt they would kill him. Kin tried her best to comfort the girl as she rubbed her back. For Hinata, this was something she still had to get used to. Affection. After her mother had died she had gotten precious little of the action until she was put on Team 8. Now with all the other girls it was almost an overload to her system with how much affection she was getting. It made her feel like she was actually wanted. Even with all that though, she would give it all up as long as she kept the affections of her beloved Naruto. Mere days after the event with Hiyashi, three girls found themselves out shopping for groceries. Hinata, Haku and Kin were out in the marketplace looking for food that they would require for meals in the coming week. For Kin it would be a new experience since the invasion and for Haku it would be even more of an eye-opening experience into Naruto's life. It was obvious as soon as they walked up to the first food stall that they weren't very welcome. The glares of the patrons spoke volumes as they browsed the selection. Even the stand owner seemed to be uncomfortable having them there. Recalling such looks from her days of stalking. Coincidentally following Naruto, Hinata decided to test a new theory. Anyo, how much would it be for a dozen plums, sir? The owner looked towards her and sniffed, seemingly annoyed with her very presence. 576 yen. The girls were stunned. But it says here that they're 16 yen each. How could they possibly add up to that much? Kin asked. The stall owner just smirked at her. Demon tax. As soon as the words left his mouth the stall grew deathly cold. Care to repeat that, sir? I said, demon tax, and that goes out to any demon's horse too. He replied, completely unfazed by their glares. If you don't like it you can go somewhere else. Too bad for you. Smiling he turned to another customer who was ready to pay and completed their transaction, including a dozen plums for the normal price of 192 yen. A mere third of what he was going to charge them. I see, so this is how you treated him. Well that's fine, there are other places to get food from besides this dump. We'll just go to someone who deserves out money, not some blind fool who can't see past his own nose hairs. With a turn, the three girls walked away from the stall, missing the owner's smirk as he watched them cross to another stand a short distance away. Soon they became slightly frustrated as stall after stall saw fit to adjust its prices on the spot for them. After an hour and a half of trying to find someone who wasn't prejudiced against them for being friends with the blonde, they sat down on a bench to rest. I knew it was bad for him, but that they would go so far as to do the same to us, it makes me wonder just why we protect them. Hinata sighed as she stared across the street into the glare of their most recent attempt at gathering supplies. And this is what Naruto-sama had to go through his whole life. Hell in Oto they were too afraid of us to even consider such a thing. Hell most of them gave the ninja discounts out of fear of retaliation. No wonder he wanted to help out Nami, it was like he was watching others live his life. I think if I had to grow up with this I would have been begging Zabuza to kill Gato and just take what we could get some money for before leaving. Well, we aren't going to be able to eat if we don't find somewhere to get food, so we better just keep it. I just hope the insults don't get much worse or I may do something I might regret later. Kin announced before forcing herself to stand. The other two begrudgingly followed her lead and they began their search once more. It wasn't until 5 stalls and many arguments later that they met a familiar face. Good morning, ladies. Kurenai smiled down at them as they entered her view. All she got in reply was some tired grumbling. Laughing it off as tiredness from training, the genjutsu mistress finished paying her bill before turning back to them. Have a pleasant afternoon. Hinata, I'll see you tomorrow for training in AD rank. Smiling, she was about to leave when the girl's conversation with the stand's owner hit her ears. Okay sir, how much for that rice? Kurenai could hear the venom in Hinata's voice despite her attempt at hiding it. Curious, she hung back a little, wondering what could have brought that on. 10,000 yen. The Jonin whipped her head around in surprise, wondering what they would need with so much rice. What she saw stopped her short of yelling at them. The bag the girl was pointing to couldn't have been more than 10 kilograms. The owner was either blind, or overpricing them on purpose. The grin on the man's face spoke closer to the latter. Well, that wasn't the highest cost today, but also not the lowest. Kin sighed. We don't have many options left. We could always ask for a mission to go to a town outside of Konoha and bring stuff back, but that would take a while and the chances of some of the food spoiling would be high. Haku grumbled back. Excuse me, I couldn't help but overhear you plight. The heads of those in the stall looked towards the voice to see a rather angry, red-eyed woman glaring at the owner. I believe I just bought that same sized bag of rice for 2,500 yen. Perhaps my ears were deceiving me when I heard you telling those girls the price was 4 times that. Though the man was obviously displeased at her intervention, he held a straight face. You just got lucky to get your food when you did, inflation and all that. It's a pity, really. Inflation in that short amount of time. Really. Well, perhaps I should go warn my friends that they should start growing their own food from now on if they want to eat without going bankrupt, and trust me, I have a lot of friends. She glared at him as he fidgeted around. Finally seeming to come to a decision, he let out a rather gruff noise and turned sharply to the 3 teens. Fine. The rice is 2,500 yen. Now if you're going to buy it, then do so and leave. Oh, I'm sure they can't get by on just rice. Here girls, let me help you gather your necessities. Since one of you is on my squad, it's only right that I watch your diet. Over the course of the next half hour, the quartet managed to gather what they wanted from the stall and pay the disgruntled owner the correct amount for the bounty. Thank you, Kurenai-sensei. It seems that even saving the village from a rampaging monster isn't enough for them to see him as an equal. Perhaps someday the truth will come out and we'll be able to talk to them freely about it. Kurenai was shocked at the insinuation of her student. Pulling her aside and signaling the other two to wait, she crouched down and looked the girl in the eyes. You know about him, she whispered to the former Hyuga. Hinata blushed a bit before answering. After following him around for so long, it was only a matter of time before I overheard the mutterings. Yes, I know what's inside of him. I also know that he is not that thing. After being near him now for so long, I know that he is Naruto-kun and he wants nothing more than to protect those who deserve it, and even those who don't. She sent a glare in the general direction of the populace before turning back to her sensei. I could never hold it against him for what he's had to bear, it just makes it that much more infuriating when someone denounces his strength. He's so strong and yet so kind and caring that it makes me so angry when they insult him, sensei. I just wish they would take the time to give him a chance. Suddenly finding the ground very interesting, Hinata missed the smile on her mentor's face. Putting a finger on the girl's chin to force her gaze up, Kurenai made sure that she saw her approval. Hinata, I'm sure Naruto would be happy to know that you feel this way even knowing what he holds. While I'm surprised that you know, and wish that I knew who you found out from, I am proud that you aren't following in their opinions. How could I, sensei, when he was one of the first to accept me? Her statement earned her a comforting hug from the woman before they turned back to the others. Well, I'm sure you didn't come here for just that little bit, so how about we get your shopping finished? Don't worry about where you go, I'll deal with anyone that tries to stop you. Ino. Is that you? Closing the door behind her, Ino called out to her mom. Yeah mom, I'm home. Come to the kitchen dear, your father and I want to have a word with you. As she made her way through the house, Ino couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding slither through her. That feeling only heightened when she was met with both of her parents sitting at the table along with one more Ino Ibiki. Eyes landing on the man from the first portion of the Chunin exams, she could do little but blink in surprise. Hi. What did you want? Ino honey, this is Kanaha's head interrogator, Morino Ibiki. He wants to ask you a few questions. Inoichi explained. Ino-san, we have reports that you've been seen around town with at least 2 of our current captives. First, I would like to ask you about events concerning one Haruno Sakura. Ibiki ready to pen on the notepad in front of him, ready to take down her statements. They could tell this was going to be difficult on the girl as she slumped into a chair, yet at the same time her parents couldn't be more proud. Normally they would have thought that their daughter would run off to her room, but lately she seemed to be changing. Ever since she participated in the Chunin exams they noticed her changing. She no longer hung out with her childhood friend, even for a rival spat. She never mentioned her academy crush Sasuke either, though she tended to bring up the Uzumaki boy more often. Her mother had gotten bent into a knot about that for a bit, but after a brief talk with her husband behind a closed door and she seemed to have changed to at least neutrality. What about her? As you should be aware, Haruno Sakura was detained for breaking and entering the estate of Uzumaki Naruto, harm to his person and theft of his possessions. Yeah, so what do you need me for? If you know all that, just lock her away and throw away the key. Her easy dismissal of what used to be her best friend startled the 3 a little. This was after all the little girl that she used to be inseparable from. Right, well it isn't quite that simple. What we need is a little more information on her before we get started with direct questioning. This isn't something we would normally do, but since you will most likely be going into the interrogation field we figure picking your brain couldn't hurt a bit. To get started, you were in the same class as Sakura-san. How did she act around that time? Well, we were friends at one point, and I helped her get over her shyness, but that changed when Sasuke came into the picture. Everything changed. She was still the same brain that she always was, but anything outside of classwork seemed to turn her into an automatic ditz. I won't lie and say I was a saint myself, but at least I still practiced my clan techniques and did some training. Ino took a moment to pour herself some tea from the offered pitcher and take a sip to calm herself. She would soon be treading dangerous waters as far as her parents were concerned, and she wasn't sure just how much either of them knew about certain events that had happened recently. So basically Sakura-san was already after the Uchiha in the academy and would have done anything for his attention. Ibiki summarized the situation just to make sure he had the right idea. That's pretty much it. It didn't help that her mother goaded her into impressing him practically every day. The few times I did see her after the end of our friendship, her mother was basically only concerned about how much she impressed Sasuke. Or how badly she hurt Naruto-kun. Speaking of him, how did she treat Uzumaki in the academy? Ino suddenly felt a little uncomfortable. She really didn't want to recall this part, but it was her duty now. He was the doby of the class, the moron. Hated by the teachers and parents and the kid we were all warned to stay away from almost daily. If she wasn't beating on him for going against her opinion or trying to ask her out, she was just ignoring him. Like the rest of us. Her mother put a comforting hand on her shoulder, earning a half-hearted smile in return. What about after graduation? Inoichi wanted to get the questions moving to a part that even he was more curious about. He had only heard a brief description about the Chunin exams, but it was going to have to come to light now. When we graduated, Naruto changed. Not in a bad way, but he was suddenly smarter and stronger. She didn't take it well, neither did I, but I got over it once my real training began. I didn't really see much of her until the exams, but whenever I did she was always shadowing Sasuke. I heard of a couple confrontations though between her and Naruto. When the exams came up I thought it would be a great chance to beat some sense into her and show her I was the one for Sasuke. Hey. Now I'm glad that fell through. It seems like all those involved are pretty much connected throughout their history. Regardless, continue and I'll just separate what I can. Ibiki flipped the page of his notepad over to a new sheet and got ready to write. The first exam you already know about, and since it wasn't really interactive I don't think I need to talk about it. Getting a nod to continue, Ino took a deep breath. We caught up with Team 7 in the forest as Sakura was trying to fend off a team from Oto. She might not have been my friend anymore, but I didn't want to see her die right in front of me, so I forced my team to help. At the end of the fight Sasuke came out and chased them away, but he was covered in some weird marks and acting really strange. He grabbed Sakura and me and headed into a hollow in a large tree. At first I thought I would be happy when I saw him do things with Sakura. She saw some disappointment in her parents' eyes and it stung that it was directed at her, but she pressed on. But then I started to get nervous and didn't want to be a part of it. I tried to get away, but Sasuke grabbed me and forced me back inside before threatening to force himself on me if I didn't remove my clothes. Inoichi nearly bent his spoon in half at the revelation. He'd heard it all before, but spared his wife the details. Now that it was out in the open she was clutching his other hand so hard that he was making a fist and gritting his teeth in an attempt to stem the pain. My poor baby. He didn't hurt you, did he? I want charges pressed against that little bastard. Dear, we can't press charges because it was done during a simulated real-life event. They were allowed to go to whatever extent they deemed necessary to complete that portion of the exam. He tried to calm her down, but she was already in tears. Meanwhile Ino was trying to hold her own back as she fought to continue. After Naruto dealt with them he gave our team the scroll we needed and we all went to the tower together, minus Team 7 as he felt they didn't deserve his generosity. Gee, I wonder why. Ibiki thought to himself. My next run-in with them didn't really happen until my fight with Sakura in the preliminaries. She constantly hounded me on how I should be the Uchiha's bitch and be happy about it, and even attacked me after the fight was over. Kin and Naruto stopped her from continuing though. Again we didn't interact for a while, but when we did she felt the need to constantly hound me about Sasuke even though I am no longer interested in him. Quote. I see. If that's everything then I'll be on my way. Thank you for your time Ino-san and I hope to meet you under better circumstances in the future. Hi, Ibiki-san. Taking his cue from the somber mood, Ibiki stood and clapped his fellow interrogator on the shoulder in farewell before retreating from the home to get to work. As he exited through the front door he saw the two elder Yamanaka embracing their daughter as she finally succumbed to her tears. Hiding her emotions for so long. She'll make her father proud one day. Ah Uchiha-san. How are you this afternoon? The bright and cheery attitude of Mitarashi Anko was a little much of a mismatch for the current decor of the surrounding room. Considering they were in one of the lower levels of the Anbu prison one would think a person would be at least a little gloomy, but here she was all smiles. Disturbing smiles, but smiles nonetheless. From his chained spot on the wall Sasuke glared at the woman before spitting in her general direction. The bandages on his arm and leg still tinged slightly pink from the rough stitches he got and the cast on his wrist itched so much that it was maddening, but shackled as he was he couldn't do anything about it. And what would the snake whore care about my day? Once I get out of here you'll know just where you stand, I promise you that. Well, whether you leave or not all depends on how you decide to answer my questions. Personally I hope you resist a bit because I'm in a playful mood. As she casually talked, Anko laid out a scroll on the nearby table and started to unroll it. Do you know where I got this scroll? A grunt was the only reply she got and it caused her to snicker. I got it from someone you're very familiar with. That little blonde brat Uzumaki seems to fancy himself an interrogator, and to be honest from what I've seen this stuff he'd make a pretty damn good one. As if that Dobie could do anything right. Paint balls and feathers will do little against me bitch. He activated what he could of his Sharingan to add a little intimidation but the woman easily shrugged it off, adding in a laugh at his pitiful attempts. Well, you can either tell me what I want to know, or... She unsealed the first item and the third. Appearing in her hands were now a roll of pins, a thick rope of material and a lighter. We can see just how adapted to fire you really are. To show exactly what she meant, Anko chopped off a small piece of the rope and placed it on the end of a pin before pushing it into the boy's bicep. Taking a moment to watch his face wince from the pinch she lit the material, showing it to be a slow-burning compound. Much to the boy's distress, the heat of the mixture was easily picked up by the needle and transferred directly inside his body. The resulting scream was forcefully silenced as Sasuke glared at her with gritted teeth. You'll have to do better than that you slut. Uchiha don't break easily. Oh that's good, because I want to be able to play for a long time. Don't disappoint me now. I wouldn't want to end too soon. The sickly sweet tone of her voice made him begin to sweat a little, but it was when he noticed what she was doing that he actually turned pale. On a tray between them she was placing more pins with the flammable mixture wadded on them. Already at least 30 prepared pins were arranged on a diagram of the human body. It didn't take a genius to figure out that the placement on the chart was where she was planning to insert them into his body, and some of them looked far more painful than the single pin that was in him now. Or aren't you supposed to be asking me questions? Oh, right. I got so excited about my new toys that I almost forgot that part. Let's see, did you or did you not stab Genin Uzumaki Naruto? Even though she was going through with the questioning, she began inserting the pins along his arms and legs. Tish, yes, and I did it again too. The Uchiha tried not to wince at each prick this time, and managed to ignore a few. I did it again too if I got the chance. It's just too bad that Suna bitch blocked me, or I'd have killed him then and there and rid the world of an eyesore. Really now? That's interesting. So, even though he is a loyal Konoha ninja, you would willingly attack him of your own volition. Bring him here now and I'll gladly cut off his head in front of you. He gave her the best glare he could despite the numerous pins sticking out of him. How about that story about Inuzuka Kiba during your mission to Nami no Kuni? It was all Anko could do to not start lighting the kid up now just to hear him scream. What's there to say? He was in an optimal position to protect the last Uchiha. If you were me, would you have let such an opportunity pass you by? That earned a twist of the needle she had just put into his left pectoral, eliciting a small scream. I know better than to use my comrades as a means of escape. I would have looked for any other means to get away than risk a teammate's life for my own. Ha. Don't get all high and mighty, snake bitch. I know all about your loyalties. You couldn't fool a toddler. Another bad move on the part of the Avenger, and that point would be driven home by the screams that now traveled the halls. In another area of the prison, two females were sitting on their respective cots facing each other but not talking. They could see and hear each other through the bars in the center of their shared cell, but any other interaction was severely limited. Isako looked at her daughter with quite a bit of displeasure before breaking their silence. You know we wouldn't be in this mess if you had been stronger. I thought you were the smartest one in your class. Yet you let that Yamanaka bastard walk around your head freely. Now we have to go through this interrogation crap because you were too weak. No wonder Uchiha-sama hasn't accepted your advances yet. Sakura just sat there unblinking, causing Isako to sniff at her indignantly. They sat in silence once again for another hour before a loud scream echoed through the hall, bringing the girl out of whatever trance she had been in. Sasuke-kun. What are they doing to him? She looked frantically toward her mother for help, but found only a cold, hard glare. The same thing they'll be doing to us soon, you little brat. Ah, I should have never trusted you for such a thing. I could have seduced him myself long ago, but I chose to go another route to make our family stronger. Perhaps there's still hope though. Maybe they'll allow you to bear his child if only to take it from you once it's born. After all, I doubt he'll be leaving anytime soon, and with what you pulled, you and I are going to be in here for a while too. Sakura was going to reply but was interrupted as the cell door on her mother's side opened. Her eyes immediately darted to his bandana as she recalled the scars that lay beneath it from the last time she had met Ibiki. Haruno. His voice grated out with obvious distaste. So glad to see you gracing us with your presence once again. It's rather convenient considering we were unable to finish our conversations from before. Despite his smile, Sakura felt a shiver go down her spine. Something about it seemed strange to her, like it was hiding a lot more than the face the man wore at the Chunin exams. Despite his intimidating aura, Isako was able to look him in the eye, though she paled visibly behind her scowl. I believe I've said everything I plan on telling you last time, Ibiki. I don't know what you plan on getting out of this little visit, but it won't be much, I promise you that. Said the fly to the spider. The cracked door on Sakura's side of the room opened to reveal Inoichi Yamanaka as he walked through the opening. Hello again, Isako, Sakura. Now, which of you wish to begin talking first? He looked at Sakura and noticed she was now huddled in the corner of her cot as far away from him as she could get. On the other side of the bars, Isako was glaring at him. He would have thought it was without fear if her own cot wasn't clattering from her shaking. Neither. Well, there are a few ways we can do this. First, and probably the easiest, I can search your minds for what we want to know. Of course that is both time-consuming and not very fun for me. We could also try Ibiki's or my methods of mental torture. Effective, but I can't guarantee your sanity afterward. He took a moment to look between the two women. Of course I can't guarantee your sanity as you are now either. How dare you make such claims? Neither myself or my daughter are anything but mentally stable. Isako spat at him. Right. Anyhow, there is also physical torture. While that is more Anko's style, we can be more than accommodating. Unfortunately she has our newest toys in use currently. Sakura was about to whimper out what he meant, but the unholy scream that ripped through the still open door made her eyes widen in horror. Sasuke-kun. What are you doing to him? She attempted to make a break for the door in order to save him, but as she tried to dodge around Inoichi the man easily held out an arm and with a thrust at her neck sent her sprawling back across the floor. This action of course made Isako lunge for the bars between them in concern for her choking daughter. How dare you harm my little girl? If you lay another finger on her I'll have you locked away for the rest of your life. Like her daughter, Isako soon found a grip around her neck as she was thrown back to her caught compliments of Ibiki before his partner clued them in on what they heard. Shut up woman. You are the prisoners and we are your worst nightmare. That scream you just heard was indeed dear Sasuke. Right now he's having a little fun with Anko and our new interrogation scroll. We haven't gone through everything in it yet, but the creator of it was kind enough to leave instructions for its use. I decided to let Anko use it as she saw fit to get the information from him that we want. From the sounds of it, she's decided on her physical approach. A pity really, from what I've seen some of those items sealed in there have the potential to leave some nasty scars. Now, how about we allow you to reevaluate your situation? You are stuck in this cell until you are found innocent, which may or may not ever happen. If you are found guilty, your sentence may be reduced depending on the information given. If we suspect you, either of you, are holding back we are authorized to use any means necessary to find out what we want to know. Now we've already had a peek into your most recent actions thanks to Inoichi's visit inside Sakura's head, so hiding anything he saw is useless. Ibiki watched the blonde shudder a little from the memory of his mind walk and smirked. What did you see in her head? Isako asked them. Tisk, tisk, tisk. Now that would be telling, wouldn't it Haruno? You're not about to get off that easily. If we told you what we saw you would just tell us that there was nothing else. For us not telling you is better because you have no choice but to tell us everything or face further torture. Don't hurt my mother. Sakura had tears glistening in the corners of her eyes as she nursed a bruised elbow. Shut up and stop being so weak you little tramp. The yell had the effect of making many eyes widen, but none so much as Sakura's herself. Mommy. The teen was in complete disbelief that her mother would yell at her like that. You see Sakura, your mother has already gone through some of our treatments. It seems that she's a little anxious to go through more and it's put a bit of stress on her. Don't take her words right now too close to heart. After all, they are probably the closest thing to her true feelings right now. Her greatest fear right now is showing us too much of her dirty laundry, but she also knows that if she doesn't cover everything I saw inside your little head that she'll be in for some rather harsh punishments. Inoichi's calm explanation gave Sakura the creeps, but at the same time she saw her mother's eyes widen as he had apparently pinpointed exactly what was going through her head. Sakura sat there trying to decipher what exactly was going on. If her mother really had secrets that she was hiding from Konoha that would be bad enough to warrant interrogation. What had she kept from herself and her father? Head drooping, Isako started relating events that she thought her daughter might have shown them. Slowly she picked her way through memories of her interactions with her daughter and recalled them. Her encouraging of her daughter to pursue the Uchiha in order to raise the position of their family. Encouraging her daughter to mistreat the Uzumaki brat. Telling her daughter to steal Naruto's jutsu in order to impress the Uchiha. Organizing a mob to raid the Namikaze estate. That was as far as she was willing to admit openly in front of her daughter. Unfortunately the gods of mercy were not with her that day as Ibiki stepped up to her. Well Isako, that does indeed match up with what Yamanaka-san saw in your daughter's head. But we think you can do a little better than that. After all you admitted to more when we last saw you. Unless you're willing to admit everything we will be forced to use drastic measures. Isako kept her face to the floor, unwilling to relinquish more. I see, that's a shame, truly. Ibiki, Sasuke's screams have stopped. See if Anko is done and let her know we require her assistance. After Inoichi left room, Ibiki turned back to Isako as he heard her whisper something. I didn't quite catch that, Haruno-san. Could you repeat it please? In a soft voice that he could tell was strained, she answered him. Take my daughter away from here, please. She doesn't need to be here for this. Even after what you called her, you're trying to act the kind, caring mother. While I would love to have her stay though, she already left with Inoichi, see. Isako looked up at the bars that had separated her from her daughter and saw an empty room. Sighing in relief, she sat back up on her cot and awaited what was coming like a true counselor, even if she was sweating like mad. Her apprehension only increased when she saw the cell door open behind the massive man. To her surprise, she saw both the blonde hair of the Yamanaka and the purple hair of Anko. Her fear spiked as she saw the smile on the other woman's face. Ah, Isako-chan. I was hoping I could play with you some more. After last time I didn't think you wanted to have any more fun. Her insane grin only widened at the look of terror framed by that pink hair. How did it go with the Uchiha? Ibiki asked without turning to the new arrivals. Oh, he didn't talk much yet, but did you hear those screams? He'll either talk soon or go mad. Fun for me either way. And our gift works like a charm. I'll tell you, that kid is devilishly creative. I couldn't have dreamed up half this shit even hopped up on 10 soldier pills. Despite that fact that such a thing would kill her, it got the point across. Overdosing on almost anything related to their profession was usually accompanied with delusions shortly before the death of the user. Some of their best torture devices were crafted from the interpretations of some of their more insane patients. Well, what would you recommend for our dear Isako? Oh, we could try one of the ones I haven't done yet. The two males' sweat dropped at the sight of Anko bouncing up and down on her heels. It was rather apparent that she approved of their little gift. As long as it isn't too damaging, I suppose you could indulge. Instantly the scroll was unraveled across the floor in front of the female interrogator. The waited rather impatiently as she reached for numerous seals before jerking her hand back in indecision. Finally, after what seemed like half an hour, she selected on with a nod of her head and they watched as the smoke dissipated. On the scroll sat a small sheet of paper along with something that made even Isako's eyes raise in question. Sitting for all of them to view was a small jar of feathers, some rope and a bag of small clamps. Even Anko was at a loss as she looked up to the other two questioningly. I've heard of tickle torture, but why the rope and clamps? When they simply shrugged in answer, she picked up the accompanying instruction paper. Her eyebrows hit her hairline as she read while a wicked grin crossed her face. Once she finished going over the steps and explanation, she shoved the paper into the hands of the curious Ibiki while she grabbed the rope and headed for the rather uncomfortable-looking counselor. By the time the two men were finished reading, Anko had Isako forcefully stripped and somewhat loosely tied to the cot. The coarse rope wound around the woman's body before coiling under the frame before re-emerging to wind around her more. The bindings, while nowhere near tight, were in some rather uncomfortable places. As she shifted on her back, the rope rubbed against her neck, wrists, ankles, stomach, thighs, armpits, the tops and bottoms of her breasts, as well as two strands going on either side of her womanhood. The three left standing watched as she glared at them and yelled all the obscenities she could think of. With a calm grace, Inoichi strode over to the side of the cot and crouched down so he was closer to her level, while at the same time forcing her to turn her head to look at him. So Isako, are you willing to spill your personal secrets, or do we have to continue with the other portions of this torture? Fuck you, you prissy bastard. You won't get away with treating me like this. Mark my words, it will be you in one of these cells soon enough. The blonde let out a nearly convincing sigh of resignation before looking over to Anko and nodding her to commence. For the amount of time it took the woman to appear at the side of her captive, they would have thought she had used a shunshin. Her glee-filled grin sent shivers up the spines of at least Inoichi and Isako. Even the stoic face of Ibiki seemed to grimace a little more. With little preamble, the snake mistress began to slowly pull out a couple of the clamps and pinch them on the flesh of the Haruno's stomach. It wasn't the most sensitive flesh she had to work with, but where would be the fun if she broke the woman too quickly? Even the slight pain made the victim wince as she was not used to such a thing. With the first phases finished, Anko returned to the rest of the equipment and grabbed a couple of the feathers. This time she took her time coming back, making a show of twirling the feathers in the air. As she got to the end of the cot, she ran a feather up the dirty mattress, letting it glide across the surface smoothly before it hit flesh. Isuko's foot jerked at the sudden contact. The jerks only worsened as the feather traveled up her calf and around her knee. Despite the discomfort the ropes brought her, she tried her hardest to strain them as she tried to get away from the sensations the feather brought. As quickly as they came though, the touch stopped and her squinted eyes opened. Now that you've had a small taste of what's to come, are you willing to talk? Ibiki asked from his spot at the wall. Your little tickle session doesn't scare me. In fact, it feels rather fun. If this is what our interrogation department deems torture to be, then I say we have been lucky to get what information we have. Why, I could think of half a dozen better tortures than. The woman's breath was forced to hitch in her throat as two more clamps clipped to the undersides of her arms, in the skin around her triceps. She grit her teeth before glaring at her handlers, but had to close them once again as another two clips found their way to her thighs near her knees. A sharp intake of breath was her only verbal reaction. Before she could open her eyes again, she felt the silky smoothness of the feather tickling her arm as it slowly moved up towards her elbow. Again she started to wriggle under the ministrations of Anko, but the accursed rope held fast despite how loose it felt. With each jerk of her body the thing rubbed harshly against her skin, causing even more discomfort. Still the infernal beast did not let up with the feather, allowing it to curl in the nook of her joint with the lightest touch possible before again stopping. I admire your bravado, Haruno-san, but it's pointless. We have a long way to go and you're already starting to show your limits. Indeed, the woman was beginning to breathe a bit heavier and the places that the rope touched were glowing a faint red color, showing the irritation to those areas. Gee, go to hell. Despite the tickle of the feather, she was still able to manage to add a little hostility to her words. Of course that did little to aid her as more pinches came in rapid succession. 4 clips on her sides, 2 just under her breasts, another 2 on the cartilage of her ears. Then the flimsy tool of the sadistic bitch was on her again. This time it began to be too much as Anko traced her biceps and armpits, using 2 feathers and taking obvious pleasure in the older woman's discomfort. With her pink hair starting to get a bit damp from sweat, she started to cry out as the feather hit particularly sensitive areas. The mixture of pain from the clamps, the sensations of the feather dancing across her skin and the discomfort of the ropes was easily working her mind into the realization that it can only get worse. After all, they had a rather large bag of clamps and there were more than 2 feathers in that jar. Fine. She cried out in between Anko's movements to a now area. Instantly the feathers stopped but stayed hovered over her skin, threatening to continue their assault if they didn't like what she had to say. Glaring at her captors as hard as she could muster in her state, she spat haughtily at them. What exactly are you after? You want to know why I made my girl do those things? It was because it was the best chance our family had of joining a respected clan that we had available. I would have done it myself if I had thought Uchiha-sama would have accepted me, but even I know that I am far too old for that to happen without due suspicion. Since my own attempts at making the Haruno family into a clan failed, I decided to continue my efforts through those that had more paths open to them. So you sold out your own daughter and coerced her into being a wanton slut for that arrogant brat. You're sicker than I am. Anko said in very real disgust. Tearing a person down physically and mentally in order to get information for the good of the village was easy for her, but, considering her past, using others for your own selfish goals through coercion was worse than anything she could manage. Sure, she'd played the seductress more than once, but it wasn't for her own power, it was for the protection of her village. Isuko narrowed her eyes at the woman. That's right. I sold out my own flesh and blood in order to raise my family's status to where I deemed it should be. Being the laughingstock of the council doesn't sit well with me, and I am determined to change that no matter what. If that mean ruining my girl's future to ensure a higher standing, then so be it. Anko was about to start attacking her again out of spite, but a firm hand stopped her from succeeding. Looking up, she found Ibiki glaring directly into the Haruno's eyes. Moreno Ibiki had heard of people using their family members to gain power before, but something about Isuko's story just didn't seem right. What had you attempted before setting your daughter on this course? The woman smiled back at him and replied in her best sing-song voice. Oh, you know, sleeping with men in power. Trying to bear their children in order to have blackmail material to use against them. I even attempted to seduce members of existing clans, but that didn't work very well. It seems most of them believe pink hair is a bad shade to have as a ninja. Like blonde is any better, ha. I've done everything I could think of to gain status, including trying to create a new bloodline. That of course failed as well. See create a bloodline. As far as Anko knew such a thing was impossible. How? As if finally realizing she'd said too much, Isako sealed her lips and glared at the ceiling. Determination filled her eyes, showing that she knew what was about to happen and was preparing for the worst. To Anko's surprise, Ibiki forced her hand to move. Not away though. Instead he forced her to begin her torture once more, something she was all too happy to oblige him with. The bound woman was soon writhing once more as the feather danced across her skin. Anko didn't even stop her actions as Ibiki and Inoichi began putting clips on her most sensitive areas. Armpits, inner thighs, breasts, labia and some particularly jagged clips topped her nipples as she started to scream from the intense sensations of the various feelings going through her form. Forget it, you assholes. I'll get my daughter to rape him next. He's too fucked in the head to even resist it anyway. You'll never get your proof. The torture reached its climax for her body, and with one last scream she slumped on her cot and the smell of urine filled the air. The clatter of a clamp hitting the floor filled the now deathly silent room. Two of the torturers looked at the third questioningly as they saw his face pale and his eyes widen in shock. Then as quickly as it appeared it was gone, and in its place was a visage they had never seen before on the man. Inoichi. Ibiki was unsure how to approach his longtime friend. He'd never seen the man so mad before. It looked as if he was barely holding in his rage. He went to put a comforting hand on the blonde's shoulder, but when he expected the feeling of cloth on his hand, he found that he held nothing but air. In the next instant a loud slap echoed through the cell. Inoichi. Anko was shocked. One of her mentors had just done the one thing they were told to never do. Hell, he was the one that taught her how to achieve this, yet here he was now letting his emotions run wild as he struck the bound woman hard enough across the face to knock out a tooth or two. With teeth clenched and hands still raised from the strike, Inoichi let his killing intent flood over their captive. You fucking little slut. You cowardly, unfaithful, loathsome bitch. If I were allowed, I would skin you alive and nail you to the buildings in the market square so everyone could see just how hideous you are. I won't though. I have my instructions and I intend to abide by them. After all, some of us follow the laws. Most of those who don't at least have morals. You obviously know nothing of either. I'm sure the punishment the Hokage will come up with will be more than enough to cover for some of your past transgressions, but for that event, I think the lowest level of hell would be too good for the likes of you. He took a breath to try to calm himself as he stepped away from the cot and the expanding puddle of fluid forming beneath it. Inoichi. Daughter, you, okay? Ibiki approached the man, ready to restrain him if needs be while Anko undid the bindings of their captive, being careful to avoid any liquid that may somehow contaminate her with the woman's filth. At least Inoichi's outburst had the added effect of knocking the harlot out from the sheer pressure of his killing intent alone. Hell, he himself had not felt such an intense amount for years, and never from that man. I don't know. I'm calling myself off of her interrogation schedule for the foreseeable future. I'm afraid I would fail in getting information with the temptation to just bring her pain being too strong right now. What happened? Who is it that she was talking about? That's not for me to say. I'm sorry, but trust me when I say it would only cause your own attempts at interrogating her to be tainted in the future. On the other hand, at least some good may have come from this little revelation. Bringing his hands in front of him, Inoichi's call of Kai made the bars in front of the two shimmer, revealing that the other side of the room was not as empty as it had seemed. Slumped on her knees in the center of the floor, Sakura had tears openly flowing down her face as her body heaved heavily with her sobs. The gag in her mouth was soaked through with her own saliva and tears by this point and served to keep her from voicing her opinions to the men, but they could see in her eyes and the way she was emptily staring at her mother that she would not be the same after this experience. Shino was nervous for possibly the first time in his life. This type of action was far different than one of his clan would normally pursue, but the time called for it. While his family were skeptical of his actions, they had at least let him follow his own path on the matter. He could tell that they were at least a little curious as to the outcome. His father had given him a strict set of rules to abide to, and a few lessons in his own way. Lessons that Shino guessed would not work to his benefit in his current predicament. Nonetheless, he was grateful for the attempt as he certainly had no experience in such matters. His mother on the other hand was oddly protective. She simply stated that such actions would corrupt the hive. Thankfully she didn't have the final say in the matter, though if his actions took him too far she would get a partial vote in the future. After all, his actions could very well shake the very foundations of the antisocial clan. Few others in his family gave him support, but he hadn't expected it. Others gave him inquisitive glances as he had left the compound on his way to his destination. He seemed to blend into the crowd as he made his way across to the civilian sector of the village in order to begin this self-imposed mission of his. Even in his limited emotional capacity he still managed to have thoughts stinging through his head. If this goes badly, will there be a way to rectify my mistakes? Will the parental units be accepting, or will they turn me away? Will my carefully laid out plans complete without error? As he got closer to his first goal, he felt an odd sensation in his hands. Rubbing his fingers into his palms he found them to be slightly damp with perspiration. Intriguing. Rounding a corner, he was now on the path that would lead him to the building he was looking for. His steps became even more measured as his destination came into view. He felt like time was slowing and the path was getting longer ahead of him instead of growing shorter as he got closer. A feeling of apprehension washed over him, making his eyebrows raise in contemplation of this new sensation. It was most vexing, but before he had time to ponder it he found himself standing in front of a door. Calming himself he brought his hand up to the wooden panel and knocked. His heartbeat pounded in his ears as he heard footsteps getting closer on the other side of the portal and he readied himself for the inevitable confrontation. The door opened and a rough-looking girl appeared in the crack that formed. Yeah, Aburame Shino. The girl thought for a minute before realizing he was saying his name. Oh. Just wait here and I'll go get her. The girl slammed the door shut and he heard the footsteps getting farther away. Apprehension began to build again and after a few more minutes he heard more footsteps coming his way. The door opened again and this time his apprehension only increased at the sight before him. Harem. Shino-kun. I'm so happy you're here. Bye Arika. I'll be back before 11. The slightly muffled voice of the now named Arika called back to them. Don't rush for my sake. Harem blushed a bit at the implication. Don't mind my roomie. She's just jealous because she doesn't have a date. She yelled the last part back over her shoulder, getting an indignant, "Rumph," in return. Giggling slightly she closed the door and wrapped her arm around Shino's. So, what do you have in mind Shino-kun? I believe an appropriate first date is dinner and perhaps a walk in the park. He may not be the most suave bachelor in Konoha, but that didn't mean he couldn't take some lessons from one of the more successful of the male populace. After all, the blonde was able to keep multiple ladies happy with his actions, so he must be doing something right. That sounds lovely. Let's hurry, I'm starved. Neji decided to pick up Tenten on his way to the hospital to visit their injured teammate. It had been slightly aggravating at first to search for her, but he finally found her walking out of the Namikaze estate. She seemed to be spending an awful lot of time around the place lately and the thought of her hanging out with that particular group made him rather uncomfortable. Tenten, would you like to go see how Lee is doing with me? Despite his stoic demeanor, Tenten couldn't help but smile slightly at his thoughts of visiting his rival. Sure Neji. I'll see you around Kin, Ino. Tell Haku and Hinata I said bye please. With acknowledging nods from the other two, she headed off across the town with Neji. Tenten, what is your relationship with the people in that estate? His question caught her a little off guard, but she answered with a smile. They're my friends. We've been hanging out a lot lately and it's been really fun. So I've noticed. His cold tone made her flinch a little, but he stayed silent for the rest of the journey. Once they arrived at the hospital and checked in, they made their way to Lee's room to find him doing one-handed, one-footed push-ups on the floor. His training gave him a reward of Tenten punching him back into his bed, yelling at him the entire time. Lee, you know you're not supposed to be pushing yourself. What would you do if you ended up doing more damage huh? The once eccentric Genin looked at his own lap and mumbled an apology back. Sorry, I just got bored. If I don't do anything all day it gets to be too much. Besides, I'm just here for some more checkups. They'll be releasing me again later this afternoon. Still, thank you both for coming once again. Both of his guests looked rather uncomfortable. Lee had said everything with such a downtrodden voice that it was difficult to believe it was really him. That and the fact that he hadn't said anything about youth since they came in was unsettling. Shaking off the tense atmosphere, Tenten tried to smile. Don't worry about it, Lee. Besides, Naruto-kun probably already found Tsunade by now and is bringing her back as we speak. She smiled a little more genuinely as the spark of hope in Lee's eyes got a little brighter. Hi. You're right, Tenten-chan. I mustn't let myself get so down when there are still those who are fighting for me. If Naruto were to find out that I've let my youth flicker, he would be most disappointed. We'll see what happens if he can manage to bring her back. The scowl Tenten gave Neji after that statement could have melted most men. Unlike you, I do not base my hopes in fabrications of hopes or chance. Tsunade-sama could be anywhere, and if they find her, I've heard she has had a bad past in Konoha and wishes to stay away from its walls. Fate seems to wish to keep her away from our company. Lee once again found his lap interesting, and Tenten was forced once again to bring him back from despair. And yet Naruto-kun has defied fate already many times, or should I go over your defeat at his hands, Neji? Then there was that monster that he defeated, and he helped the Hokage. He's gone a lot farther than most of us could dream of going at our age. Yet the populace continues to look down on him. Have you ever wondered why that may be? Hiyashi-sama has told me that he was tainted at birth, and that is why he will do everything in his power to bring Hinata back under Hyuga control. No matter what. Then he will have quite the fight on his hands. Naruto-kun won't let him take her away, and she won't come back of her own free will. She likes life away from that drab place too much to even entertain the thought. Maybe if you got out once in a while you would be able to enjoy some life too. I will take my stable life over one that brings unnecessary harm to those in my care, but thank you for your concern. The sarcasm nearly rolled off Neji's tongue as he sneered at the female member of his team. Please, you are both showing very unyouthful temperaments. If we are to be a team, you both need to get along much better. Tenten, you mustn't lash out and antagonize Neji further. Neji, how Tenten wishes to spend her time when not training with us or on missions is not our concern unless it will be detrimental to the team. Her having friends will only strengthen her bond with the village and allow her youthful nature to shine even brighter. Perhaps you should seek out some of these friends as well and join them. That will not be happening, Lee. Even if I had wanted to spend time with any of them, with Hinata there I am forbidden to be near unless one of the main branches with me. His spiteful tone was not lost on the occupants of the room. Just don't hate them for it, Neji, they aren't bad people at all. It matters not. They are enemies of the Hyuga and as such I will have nothing to do with them. The room seemed to freeze as Tenten's eyes narrowed and Lee's widened. Enemies of the Hyuga. Just because your family screwed up on enslaving another one of their own doesn't make that person an enemy, neither does socializing with that person. If that were the case then I would be your enemy too, wouldn't I? Am I your enemy, Neji? She took a step forward in challenge. If you continue this despicable action of parading around with those who are less than filth, then yes, you will be considered an enemy of the Hyuga. Neji didn't even flinch as he replied. Tell me, Hyuga, or you may be just jealous that Hinata found a way out and you're stuck with your seal. It was a low blow and everyone there knew it when Neji activated his Byakugan. He grit his teeth and took a step forward just as the door to the room opened. Good morning, my youthful student. Oh. Neji and Tenten are here too. Did you come to fan Lee Kun's flames of youth as well? His answer was a sniff from Neji as the boy left the room, not even bothering to acknowledge his sensei. It appears as though Neji's youth is in turmoil. I will have to talk to him about it later and rekindle his fires once more. Tenten just shook her head in sorrow. She really didn't mean to hurt her teammate like that, but he had brought it on himself with his arrogant attitude. Someday, Neji, you'll see that there is more to life than servitude. Shikamaru looked towards the sky and sighed. Even though Naruto wasn't there and the village seemed so calm, he was still troubled by all the recent events that had happened. He wasn't blind all his life and he knew some of what Naruto had been through, but what he couldn't figure out was why. Why did Naruto get beaten as a kid? Why did people hate him? Why did they constantly scowl and whisper when he was doing nothing but walking down the street? Why did he accept such treatment? Why? The questions had been flowing through his head ever since he'd heard about Naruto's house being broken into. Thinking back on that event only brought more questions. Why did Sakura openly steal from Naruto? Why did Sasuke want his things so badly? Naruto easily beat Sasuke. How strong is he? Again, though, he was met with the silence of the field along with the munching of chips. Yes, Choji was here with him after finishing with his own family's training. This was a pattern, something normal in all the recent chaos. Choji, what do you think is up with Naruto? The plump kid sat there munching away for a minute before grinning. Dunno. He's getting training from one of the Sannin while searching for another though, so he must be having a great time. Shikamaru sighed. That's not what I meant. I mean about why this village seems to loathe his very existence. Dunno Shika. I can only remember my dad telling me to be wary of him when I was little a couple times, but after he saw us playing together in the park he didn't seem to care anymore. Course I didn't see him often back then. That's my point. Why would we even need to be told to watch out for him, even when he was that young? It doesn't make sense. Well, maybe he had bad parents. I mean, someone had to have known who they were at some point. Maybe they were traitors or something. Choji pondered as he opened up a new bag of chips. The lazy one began to ponder his friend's words, letting them mix in with what he already knew of the blonde. He had to stifle a sardonic laugh at the other boy's thoughts on the parentage of his friend. Well, I know his parents weren't traitors. Anyone with eyes should be able to see the resemblance. I mean really, blue eyes, blonde hair, face shape, and he's an orphan. It's obvious they're covering up his background, but why? Sure, he would have enemies in Iowa without doing a thing, but there should have at least been a few trusted shinobi that could have known and protected him. It's as if his birthing was a curse. His eyes suddenly went wide as he thought back a little more. He thought back to what the villagers called him. Demon, monster, fiend, murderer. What they were yelling the first time he'd seen one of his beatings. We'll finish the job for the Yondaime. Death to all demons. You killed my husband, you bastard, die. All the evidence seemed to be right there. Even his birthday. October the 10th, the same day as. Shikamaru suddenly bolted upright, startling his companion slightly. Shikamaru. Sorry Choji. I just realized I have something to do. I'll see you tomorrow maybe. Do you need any help? Nah, it's just some information gathering. I'll be fine on my own. The determination in his friend's eyes surprised Choji enough, but the fact that he wouldn't accept any help was downright scary. If you don't mind, I'll tag along anyway. You never know when you might need a hand, right? Shikamaru stopped and seemed to ponder the question for a moment. On one hand, it could help to have an extra set of eyes, but on the other, could he really trust Choji to keep quiet with such information? Then he gave a small smile. This was Choji. The boy wouldn't try to hurt anyone without a good reason, and he would need a very good reason to let this secret out. Sure, but just so you know, what we may find out could change our lives completely along with how we see this village. The Akamichi gulped audibly, but nodded and followed as they made their way back towards the village. He could only speculate as to what could get the Nara into such a mood as to actually want to do something other than watching the clouds roll by. Kakashi stood in the middle of Training Ground 3, looking at his new team. It was rather obvious that the first thing they were going to work on was teamwork, as both Haku and Kin stood glaring at Kiba. He had to let out a sigh. It was almost the exact opposite of his previous team setup. Here the two girls were protecting each other while the only male ogled them and tried to strut his stuff. A feat that was obviously not working, but at least it seemed a lot more subdued than what he was trying in his first encounters with Haku. Ahem, welcome to Team 7 Haku, Kin. We'll be working together from now on, so try to get along. He sweat dropped at the glare he was given by the two girls. They really did not want to be a part of this team. Sensei, I propose a name change for the team. Haku announced. I for one would rather not be part of the team that so openly despised Naruto for no reason at all. I second that motion. Kin followed with a smirk. Hey, you can't just change the team name. It was given to us when we graduated by the Hokage. While he didn't like the name associated with his former teammates either, it was the name that officially made him a ninja. Yeah, well, neither of us graduated from your academy, so we never accepted your team name, besides who would want to only be known as a number? Kin argued back. You three. If we want to change our team name later we can. It's just a bit of paperwork, but we'll all have to agree on what we're called. For now we are going to train and do some missions around the village. Kiba flinched slightly. Ah, you mean D ranks. We were in the Chunin exams and you're going to make us do D ranks. Yes, Kiba. D ranks. We've just been through an invasion if you hadn't noticed, and there is a lot of residual damage to be fixed. All genin teams are helping with the reconstruction in order to get us back in shape. Chunin are helping with the defensive structures and Jonin are patrolling the forests in case someone else decides they want to try to take another shot at us while we're supposedly weakened. He managed to shut the boy up, but Kiba was noticeably fidgeting. Akamaru was busy growling and barking at him though, causing Kiba to flinch more. At least the pup seems to be able to handle his master a little better. Well then, should we start with training or a mission? Kin inquired. I say a mission so we can see where we're at. A good plan, Haku. We'll start with a mission and go from there. I'm warning you now though, I won't tolerate you three messing around. Like Kiba said, you were all in the Chunin exam so I expect you to act like it. Kakashi gave them all a stern eye, though it hovered a bit more on Kiba. Despite his fading bruises, the Inuzuka was still somewhat brash. At least he hasn't tried to force himself on anyone lately. That last week of personal treatment from Sum and Hana must have sobered him up a bit. Clearing his throat to gain their attention again, he held out a scroll. Since I knew we would be doing a mission at some point today, I went ahead and picked out one that should suit our needs. We'll be catching Tora. I really should have memorized that schedule. Haku mumbled. Nothing. It's pointless now. Let's just get this over with. At least with Mud Boy here we have a nose to lead us. Finally admitting you need me. Kiba smirked only to have his balloon popped at Haku's response. Not really. We could just take Akamaru and be just as well off. The boy slumped as his head ornament wagged his tail and the girls laughed. Fine. Let's just get this over with. So began the first mission of the reconstructed Team 7. In a hidden bunker near Konoha, a lone figure sat behind his desk reading over various reports. Each page held descriptions of what various ninja were doing around the village and giving him an idea of what opposition he would be up against. All in all, the results were satisfying. As he was about to move on to a new scroll, a slight influx of chakra alerted him to a new presence in the room. Report. It seems the two were able to find Tsunade and are currently on their way back to the village. They should be arriving within the week provided they keep their current pace. The ninja said without a hint of emotion. Very well. We will begin our plans immediately. Alert the elders. I will need to speak with them if this is to go off without a hitch. Understood. I will have them meet with you as soon as possible. The ninja vanished, leaving the man to muse over his findings once more. My time is closing in, but it has to be perfect. If they suspect anything, it will all be for naught. You may have been hailed as the god of shinobi, Hiruzen, but even gods can fall. Soon enough Konoha will be in its rightful place in the world and people across the land would say my name in awe. Danzo. Allowing himself a rare smile, Danzo continued his work. Some of his plans were already in place, but he would need to go over all new information to make sure they wouldn't be put in any danger. After all, if one teenager was able to usurp the will of the council so easily, then he would have to be twice, no, 3 times as cunning. Thanks for listening. I hope you guys liked it. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like for more what ifs and support the author. See you guys in the next video.